Okay, time for the last part. Probably the most fun because it gets a little easier at this point, is the adjusting of our auxiliary fences. Now I did go ahead and order in the machinist parallel bar, so I've got these nice steel bars on here. They just drop down. You just drop a bolt down through the hole to engage with your threaded inserts. Now I ended up coming away from my fence a bit. At one point when I was drilling some of my first row of holes, I must have had something just a little bit more out of alignment than was good. So when I went to lock down the bars in this set of holes, they sort of pulled themselves at a bit of an angle. So I just went and moved up to the second row. I do lose a little space to the back of the sled. However, I figure, you know what? If I ever have to do some stick cutting with just the rough fence, I can just put it against the back, so you know, it's still kind of good. I get some utility out of that space anyway. All I did then was I made a couple of plywood spacers in here, and then these are just bits of cardstock, which measures pretty thin. I think it's about 0.004 or so, around that size, and just made stacks of those and put them in, and then pushed the fence back and locked it down. And there's currently the same number of shims in each stack. And then what you do is you take a block of wood, you put an arrow on it, put your arrow towards the blade, cut it, rotate it so your arrow is facing down, cut it, rotate it again so your arrow is facing away, and cut it. Now I already went and did this. Okay, let me see, I'll bring it up so we can see the numbers here a little bit. So what I have at the top of my fence, I measured it with my dial calipers. Very useful when you're doing stuff like this. Get a nice pair of dial calipers. Digital's good, especially if you're getting older and you have trouble reading small numbers. I like digital. So my top is 2.4735. My bottom is 2.4690. It's a difference of 0.0045, so it's still bigger than we want. And what we have is that if the top number is bigger, you need to add shims to the outside stack. These are via the instructions over on the Instructable site. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'll probably just add one shim in. I'll grab a new test piece. This one's getting a little small for my taste. It's not too easy to hold over there when you're cutting. So I got a new test piece. I'll recut, and I'll check that and let you know how we're doing. So, but basically, you would do this. Oh, by the way, if you have a, if the bottom is wider than the top, then you add shims to the inside stack. So that's what you want to do. So I'm going to start out with these fairly thin shims. If you'd find yourself needing something even thinner, you could go to just a regular sheet paper. That's even thinner than this cardstock. You could go down to aluminum foil. You could even go look for a set of feeler gauges from most automotive stores and just pull one apart. You can get down some really thin pieces. So there's lots of ways you can play with this to adjust this to be pretty much dead on. If I can get to 0.001, I'm pretty happy on that difference. Okay, after some trial and error, I finally got everything adjusted on my right side here, since we're looking at this backwards. I am 0.001 out, and that is fine. I am totally happy with a number like that. To set up the other side, you could do kind of the same thing, but a little bit easier way is if you grab another straight edge, like one of the other parallel bars that often come with these sets. Basically, you can just set it on there and then adjust things so that this bar is perfectly parallel against it, and then just slide that back and forth, and you should have no catching at all as you move back and forth. You should see no ability to, moving in from one side to another. I do find when I cut this side, I tried the same 3-cut method. I'm a little bit more out, not a whole lot. I'm like 0.0025 or so. However, I did some other test cuts and just checked the square with one of my regular squares. I can't really see any out of square on that, so maybe in the future I'll play with this one a little bit, but for right now I'm pretty happy with that. So at this point we can take our spacers out. We don't need those. And we're ready to go. So all I'll have to do is make a couple of my hold downs with my toggle clamps, and this fence is ready to go. I've even been using the back fence occasionally for some rough cutting. You know, it's not perfectly square, but you know, if I'm just cutting something to length to put up against the other fences, I can just do that against the back fence. Like I said, I also have this room up front here that I can put pieces in for some cutting that's pretty square. So all in all, I'm pretty happy. Took a little bit of fiddling, but everything finally seems to be cutting really, really square. You may notice I have a couple of holes left to fill. When I was getting the pan head screws to put in, the hardware store didn't have enough, so next time I'm out I'll grab a few more of those and drop them in, but that fence isn't moving, so I'm not too worried about that. Alright, well I hope you enjoyed building this fence along with me, and you'll be able to take some of this and build your own. One more thing just in closing that I might do, I've got a little bit of a gap in here. I would prefer not to have that much. So what I might do is actually just make a little block. I'll use some double-sided tape and just drop it in between these two. And that will actually give me a little bit of a zero clearance insert that goes in there. Plus, you know, if it gets chewed up or comes off, it's just double stick tape. You can make another one, just drop it in there. So pretty easy to do. I've also heard of some people would actually go and grind out some of this area so they can shift this block over a bit. You're certainly welcome to do something like that if you happen to have the metalworking tools. But, you know, get inventive. There's lots of ways around little problems like this. So again, hope you enjoyed. Finally, we can wrap up with just a quick talk about some of the hold downs and other jigs that you can put on here. But first off, another little bit of a secret weapon. It's a good idea to get used to. This stuff is low friction or uhmw tape. You can get it from, like if I had on Amazon, Lee Valley, a couple of places. I put a couple of strips along the bottom. It just helps things slide that much easier. Considering this is a pretty tight jig and fairly heavy, you know, I want it fairly tight against the table saw runner so there's no play. So it's good to give yourself all the help you can. Now the hold downs, these are just these lever clamps. This is a low angle lever clamp. And I just simply screwed that onto some little pieces of scrap. I got some more of my bolts here. And I really got to like these bolts. Have a hex head on them, or a little indent for a hex head screwdriver here, or a T-wrench, and they're real easy to take on and off. So you can move these guys, position them wherever you need to. In this case, I made one that kind of sits over towards the side so I can get over more towards the blade. You could take another jig, you know, put it over on the side, cut a block in here that could end up being a stop block for you. So you can always just butt that guy up against, make your cut. Go ahead, if this was a longer strip, you could move it over, knock it down, make your cut, and just keep doing that. So the nice part is you can always have your hands up here when you're pushing. The clamps are holding everything down below. And really the sky is kind of the limit for what you want to do here. You could take these clamps out, you could position them so that they're facing the blade, and you could be cutting long strips that go this way with a great amount of holding power. If you ever find that these clamps can't get quite low enough, so for instance these are set up for about 1/2 inch stock, you can see them already towards the top of the nut. Just go ahead and put another piece of stock on top of it and then adjust your clamp to do that. That way it's just as easy to flip that up, move your stock, shift it over, put your stock in, flip it back down. That's another perfect way to hold them. You could possibly make a clamp with, instead of just holes, a groove in here so that you can actually adjust the clamp this way or this way depending on which way you're in for setting of stops. So yeah, really, you got like so many different options for what you can do. I'll probably end up picking up a bunch more of these. I might even make a couple that are sized for certain types of stock, so I don't have to keep adjusting the screws whenever I get something different. You know, just label them, then I can grab them whenever I need them. They're not that expensive. So I hope this has been a good series for everyone. You're able to learn something from it and hopefully get out there, and if you're interested, make a sled of your own. I found it to be not that hard. This is maybe a week overall for me, and that was most definitely not full-time. I do have a full-time job, so I kind of get to this, you know, on weekends or sometimes in the evening whenever I find bits of free time. But I'm expecting this to really help me out a lot. You know, I can clamp up every type of small piece I would ever need. I know I'm going to get good accurate cuts from it, and I can work so safely that, you know, it'll be easy for me to come in here and knock out, you know, 50 little squares. Whereas before, you know, I'm always worried about my hands wearing down, getting too close to the blade, or, you know, just making mistakes on the cuts. So again, I hope this helped everyone, and yeah, go out there, make one of your own, make some puzzles.